G'day, Michael here. I have been going backwards and forwards realising what I've done in my business, and I feel like I can really perhaps help people in business. It's quite an awkward thing to try and explain to people how various computer systems work, face to face. So I thought I'd make a video series. I'm running a joinery, and so as a cabinet maker joiner, I need the typical office thing you need in a small business. I need CAD programs, both 2D and 3D. I also need email. Now, I've got a long history of email, around 20 years, and I haven't lost a file or an email since 1998. Now, how have I made that possible? I use an operating system called Linux, and I'll just give you an introduction as to how that all got rolling. In 95, 98, I was using, first of all, my first networked operating system was Novell DOS 7. A friend of mine taught me and helped me get rolling with Novell DOS for networking back in those days. And about a year after the Novell DOS network was set up, out came Windows 95. And at the time, it looked like magic compared to like the typical DOS with Windows 3.1, and the environment. If you look back at that time, if you know that time, and if you weren't born then, that's cool too. But anyhow, just let it be known, an interface like Windows 95 was so revolutionary at the time, and so it got very quickly adopted. And I, of course, was one of the ones that adopted it as well. And then it moved on to Windows 98. And Windows ME around the year 2000. ME was like Windows 98 and 95, actually still based on a DOS kernel, and it wasn't really fit for purpose for the system it was expected to carry. DOS is a very simple kernel, very good kernel for a small memory footprint, and for like doing one thing at a time. It's actually quite an efficient little operating system. But as things moved along, people were using graphical environments. I'd use graphic artist type software like CorelDRAW and Adobe Illustrator, and of course digital photos came along somewhere in all of that. But back in 1998, I was having trouble with Windows 98, 95 configurations. I had 4 computers in the business, which was a lot of computers for that time, but these days it's not actually that much. I think I've got 17 now, if I include the Raspberry Pis. Now, at the time, every week or two something would be playing up. Maybe a printer driver wasn't working properly, or just there was always some malfunction somewhere that had to be sort of attended to. And the same friend that originally set me up with Novell DOS said to me, "You should try Linux." And I hadn't even heard of Linux. It was at that stage a very new operating system, and pretty much it did have a desktop environment, but there really wasn't much software available then, and hardware drivers you had to pretty much set up manually. So it was a very different creature to set up to what a Linux is now. But of course, once the system's set up, it's stable and runs. But he told me back then, it's so good you don't even know it's there as a server. So I hold him in high esteem, and I trusted every word he said, and he set up the machine for me and taught me a few things to get rolling. And yeah, I haven't looked back as far as the file server and print server, etc. Moving on to about 2001, I was spending some time setting up Windows XP, because I was still using Windows as my desktop environment, and installing Windows XP. It took the time that it did. We were using ISDN, which is like 64 kilobytes per second to 128 kilobytes per second. Can't remember the exact numbers. But anyhow, installing that took its time, and running updates, and then installing antivirus software and Office package and CAD and all that sort of guff. So I still based all my business on commercial software, and that took me about a day and a half. And just as I thought I had everything set up, it basically catastrophically failed the operating system, and I lost my temper, of course. because it was so frustrating to spend all this time on an operating system that basically died. And at that time, Windows XP was very well respected as one of the best operating systems around. So, because I'd already had the history with Linux as my file server and it being very stable and just sitting there and working, I was frustrated, and I thought, well, that's the last time I'm having a commercial operating system holding my business to ransom. And I was happy to lose functionality. But in the short space between 1998 to 2001, the available software for Linux had already changed significantly, and that's only a 3-year period. So I was able to, it took me a few months, like it didn't all happen all at once, to find together all the software that I needed for a business. And basically, I think, I can't remember the exact time, but let's say 3 to 6 months, something like that, I found a suitable 2D CAD package and later a 3D CAD package, which were the two vital organs for me running the business. OpenOffice, or I think it might have still been Star Office back then, which was written by Sun Microsystems. Its grandchild is LibreOffice now. It has a lot of features that Microsoft Office actually does not have. It had them back then. So I actually ended up with a system that provided me everything that I needed for my business. And moving along to now, which is of course about 17-18 years later, 2018, the software available for Linux, both open source and proprietary software and business class software, is plentiful. So I really think that virtually anyone would be able to use Linux as their primary desktop environment, and for the odd occasion where you've got some software that you must have, say Microsoft, for, you can run a virtual machine with Microsoft Windows installed, but that's not my favorite way of doing things. My favorite way of doing things is finding a full alternative, and for my business I've certainly been able to do that. So I'm very confident that virtually every business of my scale would be able to do that. Now, especially these days, if you've got specialized like business management software, a lot of that's cloud based, so all you need is a web browser. So the financial software is pretty much taken care of with cloud based stuff. My business is simple enough. I've been living on a spreadsheet that I've created for handling my business activity statement. I'm based in Australia. We have a GST, so that works for me. It handles 5 accounts plus all the categories that make sense for my business for a business activity statement, and that seems to work quite well. Alright, so let's have a look at, for a desktop environment, this being the first video, let's have a look at the desktop environment. Now I'm using, what you can see here on the screen, it's a 4K monitor, so the resolution will be very fine on the video you're seeing. You may not be able to see all the text, but where it's important I'll try and increase the text size, etc. But as you can see, this interface is beautiful and clean and simple. One thing that I've found, well, I guess for your business, the most important thing is how is your data stored. That really comes down to the nitty-gritty of it. Now, this operating system, being a Linux distribution called Linux Mint, is based on Ubuntu or Ubuntu. Now, this all sounds like strange words if you haven't had anything to do with Linux, but let's just maybe open Firefox. Anytime. Okay. So it goes to the Linux Mint home page, or well, actually search page. So we can have a look at the various Linux distributions. I don't know, let's try Ubuntu.com. Now, you may or may have not seen in the news, IBM has now purchased Red Hat, which was basically the first commercially supported Linux distribution group, whatever you want to call it. And Red Hat have done basically a kind of the championing of the open source cause, really. Interestingly enough, I think it was 34 billion US that IBM bought Red Hat for. Now think about that for a second. It's a software company that does not sell software, and IBM bought it for $34 billion. So open source software is a big deal. Now what's interesting is that I was talking about the file system, how things are actually stored. Let's just look up. There are a number of file systems. Now Microsoft's NTFS is actually a very good file system, and NTFS stands for New Technology File System, which, considering it's been around for 20 years, new technologies is a little bit misfitting nowadays anyway. I mean, they keep upgrading it and improving it and so forth. But let's just have a look at the latest and greatest BTRFS, which is what I've converted all my machines to that matter. And let's see what we get here. Okay, now you can look up this yourself, BTRFS. Now what's interesting, if you look at here, and I'll just zoom in there. The contributors to BTRFS are some pretty heavy hitters, some big names that you will have to you'll have to have heard of most of them. Facebook. And of course Facebook handles huge amounts of data, and they need it reliable, and consistent and online, and like you could not expect out of a Microsoft based system. Fujitsu, I don't know who Fusion IO is, but I suspect they'll be a heavy hitter. There we go. What is that? Well, you can look that up yourself. Intel, of course, everyone will know Intel. The Linux Foundation, of course. Netgear, the Oracle Foundation, Red Hat. I don't know who Strato AG is, and SUSE. SUSE is also a Linux distribution. Now, so you've got big names with a lot of credibility have contributed to this file system. Now, what makes this file system so special is they talk about the copy on write principle. Now, copy on write, at the end of the day, what it matters to you as a small business owner, you don't have to know everything about everything, but you do have to know what it's going to do for you. And that is the file systems that, such as like ext4 or NTFS or whatever, to back up your files, you need to actually make a full duplicate of your files to make like a snapshot, or anything that you want to hold, you actually have to sort of keep as a separate repository at a given time. Whereas with BTRFS, what they are actually storing in the snapshot is kind of like all the handles to all the layout of the disk, how the descriptors basically of how the disk is being used, or the storage is being used. And it costs almost no storage to create a snapshot. Whereas, like I was saying with the other file systems, although very good and sound file systems, to make a snapshot, you basically got to duplicate it. At best, you might be able to compress that duplicate. But when a lot of our files are already like photographs, JPEGs and so forth, there's not much more compression available. If they're plain text files, you can do a lot of compression, so maybe halve the volume. But either way, it's a lot of data to store, whereas BTRFS holds a snapshot very easily. And you can see here, there's snapshots mentioned. Anyhow, I've actually gone through the process of converting my file system over using this BTRFS, and I'm gobsmacked at how impressive and how good a performer it is. Now, when I first tried it a few years ago, it wasn't really fully supported, but now it is actually beautifully fully supported. And you've even got a simple desktop environment tool on Linux called Timeshift. I'll just Timeshift. Got to get on as administrator, so administrative password. That's another thing that's very nice with a Linux environment. To do an administration task, you type in administrator password on the spot just to run that task. You don't need to have yourself logged in as administrator all the way through the process. So there's a minimum amount of damage you can do by deleting files you shouldn't have, etc. So it's important to actually have that feature enabled. Don't disable the ability to have a separate admin user. Don't operate the machine generally as an admin. And that way your data is quite well protected, your operating system is quite well protected from the user. So it's good. Anyhow, let's just create a new snapshot right this second. Now I'll just have a look at file system. Okay. Now here's the file system of this computer. There's quite a bit going on here. Now I might just check out, like you may if you have Apple as your primary operating system as a desktop, which is a valid choice, but everything's got its advantages. I'll just zoom in a bit so you can see that. If you type in DF in a Unix-based system or Apple, you end up seeing what DF stands for disk-free, I believe. Anyway, here you can see what's on this machine currently and what the storage capacity of it is. Now, I'll try and describe how this works. 1K blocks. So, in other words, this number here was 39 yada yada. That was a very long number there. That's basically 4 terabytes. And this one here is basically 2 terabytes. And here you can see a terabyte and another terabyte. So you can see the amount of usage and available, and you can see the percentage usage of it. Now these, anywhere you see dev, SDA, SDB, yada yada, that represents a physical block device like a disk. So what you see here is, let's say this, let's pick on this guy, DEV. It's a folder where, or directory where there's device handles put. SDA, which is the first SATA disk or first SCSI disk. Partition 7. Its size is, what is that, 4 gigabytes. That's been set aside. 4 gigabytes? 40 gigabytes. 41 gigabytes, yep. Set aside for the root file tree. Now that's a very small partition in Windows world, but it's plenty. As you can see, it's only 17% used. Now that's where the operating system is installed and all the software, the kernel and everything, and you can see it's very efficient, and I've got a very useful desktop here. I'm not missing things. Now at the folder home, which is where all the users files get put, we've got an SDA7 is also mounted, and it's a kind of a fused loop back, and I've got other larger drives from actual storage. So you can arrange this however you like. I probably will rearrange it so this SDA6 is going to be where home is and whatnot, but that's another story. But basically here there's a lot of drives here arranged. I've only just installed this, I haven't moved in. I'm doing something a bit more complicated than most would do, but the principles are still all the same. These are your block devices. Here's where they are mounted. Here you can see the size of those block devices, the column how much used and how much available, and a percentage representation of how full the drives are. Okay, so let's make a snapshot right now of the root file tree. Let's do it right now. Click. It's been done. So that is a snapshot of this very operating system, this drive here, so that 41 gigabytes. Now that snapshot, let's just see if we can find it, where the snapshot's kept. Okay, here's the snapshot, and there you can see the file tree. Now it only costs more disk space as we write new files to the operating system. So the snapshot itself doesn't cost much storage space, but any new files that get created after that snapshot show up as new areas of disk used. Now what's also cute is if we copy the whole file system, it doesn't actually, even if you do copy a whole folder, it doesn't actually create any more data space. It in effect just creates a whole lot more handles. And only when you edit the file does the copy, let's say you edit the copy, only then does it increase in size. And the old file that was in the pre-copy part will remain its original state. So it's very cute how they've arranged this. It's a very efficient way of storing large volumes of data that don't change much, and if they do change, that's where, you know, it costs more storage space. So it's an amazingly impressive file system. So I guess that's probably it for this video, because there's a lot in it. BTRFS is a fantastic file system, very efficient for storage and backup and snapshots, and that is the basis of any operating system, is how it stores. So I guess that's probably enough for today. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, ask a question, leave a comment. I guess that's it. Bye for now.